Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. Today is another music theory breakdown where I recreate popular songs so we can talk about some music theory. Today we're talking about the hit record Pushin P featuring Young Thug by Gunna X Future. Let's go ahead into the Logic session. So this song is currently soaring on top of the charts. I think the instrumental is really cool and somewhat unique. It almost references a mode. I will talk all about that. If you haven't seen one of these before, basically I'm not going to play the vocal, so I'm playing a shorter version of the track. It's going to go through all the different parts. If you find these helpful, you would help me out a ton by subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, here's my rendition of Pushin P. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that. Once again, it's a lot shorter than the original, but since we're not hearing vocals and the vocals are changing, the beat stays the same during those verses, so I just make it shorter. This song is in the key of C sharp minor. Now, it has kind of a modal type reference or feel, and I'll talk about what that means, but basically a minor key is a musical mode, so it is starting on the 6th note of any major scale. The simplest minor key is A minor. So if you were to take these and drag them to A, you'd have all the white keys on the piano from A to A. That's A minor. Since we're on computers in the 21st century making these beats, we can literally just drag up MIDI. All of a sudden, we see all the notes in C sharp minor. C sharp minor has 4 sharps. In order from low to high in the key, it's C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, and then we get the C sharp again up an octave. This scale has the same exact notes as E major. We're just starting from C sharp. This is referred to as the relative minor to E major. Let's hear that scale. Once again, the notes are C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B to C sharp. Cool. Then the chords we're going to need. We don't have as much like straight chords in the song. I do have the chords on a pad, which is really low in the mix. But a lot of the sound of the harmony on this track comes from the pitched 808 in conjunction with the melodic line. And that really creates a cool, smooth texture to this instrumental, which is part of the reason I really like it. So the chord progression is basically a 1 chord, C sharp minor, a minor 5 chord, that is a G sharp minor. It's inverted. It's in first inversion. Then we're going to a major 7 chord. This is a B major chord. B, D sharp, and F sharp. And then finally, basically back to a 1 chord, C sharp, E, and G sharp. Now, we don't really hear this chord as much. Again, the sound of the chord comes from multiple notes happening at the same time. So what I mean by that is the loudest portion of the song is the 808. The 808's playing a C sharp and a B mostly. The melody is starting on an E. So that this first beat, we get the sound of the 808 and the melody, which gives us the 2 lower notes from this chord, which makes it sound like that C sharp minor chord. All right, I'll go through all of the different layers. We're going to talk like drums out. So this song, I charted it at 155 beats per minute. You could also look at this as 77.5, depending upon how you want to look at the grid. That basically changes, and then at 77.5, these would be 16th notes. At this key, they're 8th notes. So the simplest drum is this hi-hat. It's doing literally just 8th notes the whole time. All right. Now, I'm using swing. Swing is, most DAWs have this quantized control and swing. And what that does, I have it set to 8th note. I'm swinging out by a metric of 17 in Logic. That is changing the second of each of the eighth notes. So notice the first and third are right on the line. Second and fourth are actually slightly behind time. That is something that when human beings are playing drums, you almost always have some sort of level of movement, because human beings, we are not perfect. Check out my video on adding imperfection into your music. It helps a lot. But that goes a long way to give this that vibe. Let's hear the full drums. All right, so the second simplest rhythm to understand is our snare drum, perhaps even simpler than the hi-hats. And it's happening on beat 3, every beat 3. If you have my music theory text, I link to it below. It's a super simple, straightforward music theory approach for people like myself and yourself trying to write popular music. In that book, I talk about backbeats. Backbeats is what the snare, the clap is doing in these grooves, and standard would be on beat 2 and 4. Halftime would be on beat 3. And that's really like a a marker or a placeholder for our ears hearing where all the other rhythms are based. So the kick drum is happening on beat 1. On beat 4, we're in 4/4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. The second measure, it just happens. We don't get any kick drum. We just get that snare. Beat 3, or measure 3, is almost the same as measure 1. Kick on 1, kick on 4. Only instead of just being on 4, it's on the 4 and, so 2/8 notes. And again, swinging out. So that second one is behind time. Then finally, the last measure, this drum pattern repeats every 4 measures. Kick is on beat 2. Then we get this, what I would call a trill kick. Now, a trill in percussion is really just a grace note, like really fast notes. We hear this a lot of times on cymbals in this style, but on the kick drum, it really gives the song kind of like a character. It's super identifiable. So the kick is happening on the 8th note after the snare, so after beat 3. These look to be close to 30-second notes at 155 beats per minute. When I'm making trills, I don't really try to make them perfect. You can just have fast notes in between since they're happening so quickly. They don't have to be fully in time. It's important to know like your music history or like where the origin of whatever you're doing. So if you're into making hip hop beats, it's important to know that once upon a time, hip hop beats weren't made in MIDI controlled by a computer, but they were made with drum machines. And there's a really, really famous drum machine called an MPC that people like Kanye West program a lot of their drums on. And what it has is a few different features. One, you're hitting pads to trigger the drums. That's important to know because some of the imperfection that naturally happens when you're a human being and you're hitting the pads comes out in this style of music and in these beats. But what's also important to note is that on an MPC, it had something called note repeat. There's still MPCs, some of you may use them, but what note repeat does is it fires off a rapid amount of whatever trigger you're hitting. And because of that, all to say that, first of all, that's where the trill sound comes from. Second of all, when you do that, it's not perfectly in time. It's not like a perfect 30-second note. So where these rhythms are doesn't fully matter as long as they are fast. So that's not going to have changed much. All right, so that trill kick. The next one I want to look at is our 808. The 808 is doing the same exact rhythm as the kick drum, and this happens in both of the different sections of the song. When I'm teaching hip-hop production to students, and they haven't done a lot of this, I talk about like what I'll call team kick. The 808, an 808 really is like a pitched kick drum. It works in conjunction in a lot of trap music or a lot of hip-hop music where the kick drum and the 808 happen on the same rhythms. Sometimes you'll get extra kicks where you don't get 808s, but in essence, the 808's taking care of the low part of the sound. The kick is punching through on the top part. So this instrumental is the same. The notes are again C sharp, our root, our main one note from our key. Then we're going down to the 7. This B note. Now, what's interesting is in the fourth measure, this kind of makes a sound of a minor seventh. That's part of the cool nature of this song. Let's hear just the 808 with the drums. Sounds like this. Cool. And I'm using, to make this 808, I'm using basically the sampler default into this rendition of Logic Pro. It's changed the look, but it does the same thing. So I'm using the EXS 24, and it's basically taking an 808 sample and moving it around. So no new rhythms here, just notes added to those drums. The next layer I want to look at is our melody. The melody on its own sounds like this. Oh, on its own, it sounds like this. So those notes are E, D sharp, B, A, G sharp. So one interesting thing about the melody, we don't ever get the first note, the C sharp, and at least in the first measure. The second measure is almost the same thing, E, D sharp down to B. Then this fill, we finally do get our 1, our C sharp. We go B back to C sharp. Now, anytime we're like writing music in a key, but we don't use a lot of that first note and we kind of resolve to different tones, that's going to give it like slightly of a modal sound. Now, I could have described this song as being in the key of B mixolydian. That would be a mode using C sharp minor notes, but resolving to a B, which this song kind of does, but to my ear, in order to call things mixolydian, it's important that there's dominant seventh chords. What that means is we'd have a B major chord, B, D sharp, F sharp, and the note A happening together, and we don't find that, which is why I decided to describe this song in the key of C sharp minor. Now, if we play the melody with the bass and the drums, it sounds like this. And that 8 measure melodic phrase that repeats the whole song for this section at least, which turns out to be the hook and the main verses. The last thing to talk about is some layering. So there's an arpeggio happening really, or a sequence happening subtly in the mix. It looks like one MIDI note here. It's the same exact notes as the melody, so that should be easy to follow. The difference comes from the actual patch. If I open this up and we look at the actual patch that I'm using the CZV by Arturia, the patch called Modular Sequences. So a sequence is basically, if you put one note in, you hear multiple notes. Like that. D sharp. So that subtly in the mix adds a lot of movement. If you go and listen to that original, which I always encourage you to do, you'll hear this kind of like fluttering in the back, and that is basically created by an arpeggiator doing those same notes. Sounds like this. Now I have that patch really low in the mix, like negative 23 decibels, and it feels really low in the original. However, without that, the beat feels kind of static. With that flutter in the background, creates a lot more movement and sort of character in the instrumental. The last thing that I have added, and this is something that's also really, really low in the mix, is that chord progression I showed you in the beginning. So the 1 chord, the minor 5 chord, the 7 chord, back to the 1 chord. Inversions, I have, again, it's in root position, which means the name of the chord, C sharp minor, is in the bass. Second chord is a G sharp minor chord, but B is in the bass, so that's its third. So we call that first inversion, since the first note other than the main note is in the bass. It's kind of weird understanding the terminology with some of this chord or music theory stuff. This is a B major. It is in root position. Again, that means that B is the lowest note. And then finally, I do a 1-chord C sharp minor, only the second note that's not the root. So with C sharp, E, and G sharp, that third note or top note, depending upon how you're looking at it, that is in the bass. So we call that second inversion. That chord progression just adds a little bit of glue, if you will, to the instrumental. It gives it a little bit of a pad, a texture. The actual instrument I'm using is a pad. And that sounds like this in context. Cool. So hopefully that makes sense for the main section. And again, that covers most of the instrumental. We have one secondary section to talk about. If you have any questions on any of this stuff, feel free to leave a comment. I'm here to try to help you get better at your music production and just create a community. Making music is more than selling records. It's having fun, and I love connecting with those of you out there. So the middle section, let's just play it. Sounds like this. That was without our lead. Sounds like this, actually. All right, and this creates a lot of tension in the instrumental. Notice when it gets to this part, it feels a lot darker. And coming out of that tense part, it makes it a lot cooler when we come back to the original instrumental. So adding tension or some sort of dissonance in your beats can really not just add another color to the instrumental, but it can also make whatever you have that's your main section feel cooler when it comes back. So this is pretty simple theory-wise. The drums haven't changed. They're doing exactly the same thing we have in the earlier part. The 808 has changed the note it's playing, but the rhythm is exactly the same because, again, the rhythm of the 808 is working on what I call team kick, or it's the same thing as the kick drum. The notes that we go to, we're doing just the 5 in this key, so the G sharp. All right. The 808 and the drums on their own, not the most exciting thing in the world, but it sounds like this. All right, so again, just on that G sharp note the whole time. Now, the melodic stuff that I have is pretty cool. So one, I have, again, that pad even lower in the mix doing that chord. So this is the G sharp minor. This is a minor 5 chord in our key of C sharp minor. Really, really low in the mix. Sounds like this added in. All right. The main part of this other section comes from what happens to the lead, or how it's built. So the lead on its own sounds like this. Now, if you listen to that part, it has something that the more beats you produce, the more you train your ear, the more you'll recognize this stuff. But it has what sounds like a reverse. And a reverse is a really cool technique in music production. Basically, what it does, most sounds that you have, instruments or anything, when you play them at first, they're louder than they are a second later. All right? That difference is called decay. So what happens when we have a sound like a piano and we play it forwards and then we record it and we reverse it, the attack is smooth. So it comes in and then the sound goes away. And that's a really identifiable sound in music. Go back and listen to Castles Made of Sand, Jimi Hendrix. That has, to my knowledge, one of the most famous reversed guitar parts in music. So the way I made this, it's pretty simple. It's doing 2 notes. It's going between E and D sharp. This is a bunch of them, so that's 3 octaves of the exact same note. So all of those are E's. All of these are D sharps. All right, now I have one layer where I just do the top of these, and then I have a layer where I do all of them. Together, it gives us this full sound. So I'm calling the reverse piano and reverse higher. All right. basically what I did was I sent that all through an RC24, really cool Native Instruments reverb. I'm using a grand piano hall. It's fully wet, which means we're only hearing the reverberated signal. That I then printed into audio. So forwards, it sounds like this. Again, where the loudest part is right where the note changes. That backwards sounds like this. Which gives it a lot more of like a smoother texture. And with the higher one, it sounds like this. Once more. If we add everything else back in, it's this. Cool. So pretty simple. Hopefully that all makes sense. Now I'll finish off playing this to the end, and just notice when we get back to the main section how cool it sounds relative to just hearing that the whole entire instrumental. Awesome. So that concludes all of the different parts. Once again, we saw an instrumental in the key of C sharp minor. It had a really cool texture because it was almost modal by not using C sharp as its main sort of melodic tone. I really like this instrumental. I encourage you to go listen to it. If you have any songs you'd like to see me break down, feel free to leave those suggestions in the comments or shoot me an email. Once again, my name's Andrew. If you found this helpful, you would help me out a ton by subscribing to the channel. If you do, I'll see you next time. Have fun making music in the meantime. Cheers.